Are you excited to come to New York?
Hi. Hello, everyone. How are you? Welcome to day 5 of the Global Job Fair Week. We have some exciting things in store. Today we have Natasha Persard with us. She is HR expert extraordinaire, has worked for companies from Fortune 50 all the way, small companies, everything. She knows it all. She's like the go-to person and across borders as well. So today we're going to talk about what hiring managers should consider when hiring across borders, international borders, and also a little bit more into what candidates can also think about when they're thinking about the cultural differences as well as the cost of living differences. So I am going to leave it up to, before I do that, stay tuned to the end because we have a wonderful announcement. Some of you may have read it at the end of the email this morning, but just in case, we have something to say at the end. So until then, I am now going to introduce Natasha. Natasha, please tell the people about yourself.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's so nice to have this time with you to kind of talk a little bit about what goes into recruiting, hiring across borders, and some of the hiccups that may happen along the way that a lot of times people don't think about. As Melissa mentioned, I'm a human resources professional. I have 20 plus years in human resources. I actually started my career at a startup called The Deal, and it's a multimedia company. And from there, fell in love with human resources. I just love the idea of being able to help a company achieve its business goals utilizing the people function. I've worked for companies such as Lee and Fung, Marriott, British Airways, and a company called Photronics, which was a JV between Apple and Samsung. So a wide breadth of different industries, but within each role, I had global responsibilities as well. So definitely understand what the challenges are of managing people in the different locations, different cultures, different just idealisms of how to work. And then when you move someone from one area to the other, what does that look like? What are the challenges they face and so forth? Because you're moving them with the intention that it's going to increase the company's profitability. And by moving someone, you don't want them to have any of the hiccups and challenges they may be faced, which would stop them from giving the contributions that you relocated them for. So that's a little bit about me and looking forward to chatting further with you.
Awesome. So thank you for that wonderful introduction of yourself. I am sure now the listeners are even more keen to hear what you have to say today.
I hope so.
So let's jump right into it. I'm going to ask you some questions to, just help to guide us in terms of um, relocating an employee across borders. So the first thing I have to ask you is how can an employee and their family become familiar with the country's culture and language? And also, how can a company facilitate that for them?
So let's look at it from the company side first. So a lot of the times when the company goes into the idea of relocating an employee from one location to another, they don't think about what it is that that person's going to face culturally. So some small steps that company can do is have briefing packets, and what's in the briefing packet is, you know, cultural idioms that they should be focused with, how they should be greeting individuals. I think it's interesting because like when you go to Asia, there's a whole process with handing over your business card. You don't just be like, here you go, and just on your merry way. You have to like hold it and then turn it and then hold. So just getting familiar with it because you don't want to come off on a bad foot when you move over there. So having a culture packet is very important, including how to speak, when to speak. I remember when I worked in Korea, I didn't realize I couldn't speak to the senior vice president directly because there was only a vice president at the time. And I would have to speak to my boss who could speak to her. And I'm like, but I'm right here. Hello, I'm right here. And it didn't make a difference because culturally in Korea, I wasn't high enough to speak to her directly. So just having a culture packet of where the person is going. And in terms of the employee, I think it's really important on their own to learn where they're going. What's the culture in terms of, how they eat, how they live, what's the commuting style there? If you're, rocking up in a Mercedes Benz, they might think like, oh my gosh, like who does that? We all take the train, even the highest of, in the company. So just knowing those small nuances. And I know this is not something that's widely encouraged, but learning keywords from that country in terms of if they speak another language or something like that.
Yes.
And it's amazing because I know what you're thinking, like, oh, I don't want to mispronounce and all this other stuff. It's more about the fact that you're trying.
Exactly.
And if another country sees that you're trying, they embrace you so much more. And I remember, like, I would go to Brazil and I know like 5 words in Portuguese. And I'd be like, "Tudo bem," and they were like, "Oh my God, you don't do this!" Like, "I do this." Like it just changes the engagement, because they feel that you're trying to learn about them versus coming in and changing them.
And that's very important because the whole thing about you moving to another country is because you may have been a lot of times uncomfortable where you are before. So you should, yes, hold on to some of your own culture, but remember that you're moving to create a new environment for yourself, and a part of that is adapting to the new culture.
You know
Um,
what, Melissa, along those lines, you brought up a very good point. You're choosing to move to that location. So obviously you want to learn to what it's like to live there. So just showing up and just saying, "Hey, I'm here," is not going to have the same weight because you may have hurdles in coming across it. And I think if a company can help that employee overcome those hurdles by having chats, oh, it's something else, it's something very simple. Even having, because of video technology like we're on today, have video calls with the team and so forth in advance. Let them, see you, hear you, get more, and you get more comfortable with the team and understand, how things work. But I think it's very important that it's a collaborative initiative between both sides, company and employee, so that, you're choosing to go there. Okay, so learn. And then the company's choosing to send you there. So help them out a little bit.
I think that's great, and I also think that sometimes that will also help the employers to make sure that they're on top of the any cultural changes that have happened in that country. Because sometimes, especially with larger companies that have been doing this for years, they may have an outdated cultural package, and it's something that needs to be looked into all the time. And if they're properly engaged with the candidates, then they will also realize that sometimes some of these um, packages need a little bit of updating. So, what can okay, sorry. I want to move into the pension
Oh,
and
that
retirement.
is that's a
Yes.
dive right into it early in the
Yeah,
morning.
sorry. I'm just gonna dive right into it because I think cultural things are a little bit more easy to uh, ease yourself into. But in terms of having to make an offer or accept an offer, it's very important, especially when you're moving across borders, to make sure that that offer is correct for both individuals. Because after the move, that's not a good time to decide that this is not a good idea, right? So let's talk about the benefits that are, what you're leaving behind versus what you're going to.
So this is such a landmine of a question on both the employer side and the employee side, because it really depends where you're going to. And as someone who's initiated it from both sides, it's so difficult. So I'm going to give you one perspective, which is the US perspective. So in the United States, we as individuals, employees, and so forth have to pay for our benefits. Our benefits are not socialized. We have private health care here. The other thing is pensions is not through the government as it is in many other countries. Pensions are either, if you're lucky, privately held, or you're in something called a 401k or an IRA or something like that, where you contribute. The company may not contribute in return. So that's the US. So if you have a US employee that's going into another country, one, you have to buy medical insurance for them and so forth. But also, if their family hasn't relocated with them, you have to maintain their existing medical insurance in the US. The other thing is they may still want to contribute to their 401k, so they're not participating in the pension in the country that they're going to. So let's reverse it and say that somebody from another country is going to America. One, you have to get them private health insurance. Two, their pension, depending on the country that they're from, may get frozen because they're not paying taxes into their country anymore, or they're not, what they consider somebody that's part of the system in their country. So their pension possibly gets frozen. So there's no contributions along those tiers in their country. So
And
then, yeah,
oh,
sorry.
you just mentioned the dual taxes. Sorry,
Oh,
we're gonna get into that too, but go ahead. Sorry.
so because they're not contributing, it's that pension is frozen, so it's not accumulating the money. So a company has to figure out a way to give like a subsidy so they're not missing out on what their retirement should be and so forth, because they have to continue having that contribution as well. The other thing is that, the how you find a doctor and so forth is different in every country. So just getting utilized with that system and so forth. So I think the big thing is, if you go from a country that's socialized to America, which is private healthcare, it's just learning that. And then the reverse. It's very interesting because, in my experience, my employees who've gone from America to another country has struggled benefits wise. Whereas anybody who comes to America was like, oh, this is easy. There's a website, blah, blah, blah. Oh, wait, I don't have to pay for this. It's paid through it's a totally different gamut. And in other countries, you're with the socialized medicine, you're getting like lower tier doctors, and then you have to buy up to get the higher tier doctors. But in America, because it's private, it's like, oh, I can go to that doctor who went to Harvard, no questions asked. Okay. So it's just getting,
Less
huh?
waiting time too. The
Yeah,
emergency line is less waiting time. I mean, there are pros and cons to both sides, right? Because even with the pension, right? If you have pension with a private company, a private organization, sometimes if that company falls, then there goes your pension. Um, as opposed to if it's by the government, then you're less likely to lose, even though you're getting less.
exactly. Exactly. So there's all those little pros and cons that you have to think about.
Wonderful. Do you have any words of advice in terms of looking out for or dealing with when you have to adhere to dual tax laws? In some instances you don't, some instances you do.
Get a really good accountant. Um, that's the most important thing. And also see what's the different tax filing timetables. So, like in England, they file their taxes in April. So I know a lot of our employees were like, wait, I have to pay taxes in America, and that's, the end of the year. And in England, it's at this time. So being able to equate if you have to pay taxes for the different time frames, because you may feel like you're constantly writing a check to the government. But the other thing is that sometimes I think a lot of employees feel like they get lost in the tax process and they're losing money. And a company's intention when they're relocating someone is for an employee not to feel like it's a financial hardship. So I think a lot of times, especially for the companies I worked with, we kind of had calculators. And I think, Melissa, correct me if I'm wrong, your company has like COLA calculators
Yeah.
and things like that. And that helps the individual understand what is the real cost of the relocation and what they're going to deal with. But I think a company, it would behoove them not to have access to somebody. And most large companies like that I worked for, we have a tax department and they file taxes internationally, so forth. So they could give some guidance or be part of that
Mhm.
handbook that we talked about, that culture guide, and you could just have a tab in about taxes, a tab in about benefits, a tab in about pension, but they can give a quick little write up of what to expect if you're an employee relocating from what home country to where.
And I guess I'll also implore the hiring managers to not assume that you, because you've done it for several employees before, that you can give the advice to the new employee, because sometimes, again, depending on the country that they're coming from, different rules apply. So it's always good to have the accountant check and make sure that based on where this particular individual is coming from, these are the things that need to happen. And also on the candidate, make sure that you're doing that on your side as well, so that both are on the same page.
Yeah, I mean it gets even trickier because it's small things like when I would go to China, I would not be allowed to use my phone, my laptop, because they were worried that about, it's just a known that the Chinese have ways of, infiltrating. So I would get a new phone and a new laptop when I would have to go to China. And those are small things you have to think about when you're relocating that person. They can't take their current devices with them. You may have to give them different devices that's adaptable and so forth. And let's not talk about the plugs. That's a whole other thing.
I know, I know. Okay, so with all of this that you have to think about, do you recommend a backup plan for either party? And what is that backup plan, if you do?
I highly recommend a backup plan from my own experience. I've relocated employees who've called me crying and wanted me to book them on the next flight home because it was just so challenging for them to live in that other country because either they weren't prepared correctly for whatever the financial absorption would be. So here's an example. I had relocated an employee from the US to England. And even though we talked through everything and, I thought they were mentally prepared, then they get there and they're like, wait a minute, the cost of living is X. I'm still paying for medical insurance in America because you can't stop it. Because if you stop it, then you wouldn't be allowed to get back in. And then they're paying for other things. And then they don't realize that, there's also the conversion of how they get paid from US to pound sterling. So all those little things. And the person was like, I'm poorer with this promotion than when I was in America. I want to go back home. And I felt terrible. This person, was awful and, felt was crying. So what we did was is that we looked at everything. We looked at their package and tried to figure out a way to make them feel comfortable because they were working on a project that we needed them to work on that would help the company generate revenue. So at the end of the day, you have to look at everything. And, in hindsight, I know now in 2022, we're very open about mental well being and conversations around mental well being. And I think it behooves a company to not make that part of the conversation or the package that they're building, is to give that person some mental well being access, whether it's, an online therapist or an in person session, because they're in essence all alone wherever they're going and they need kind of that outlet to talk to. So I think something else that companies could do is include a mental well-being component to their package. And I think it would go a far way. And turn back to your question about the backup plan. Um, yes, I think you should have like a check-in points and say after 90 days, let's see where we are on both sides and if this is still working. Because you also have to figure out that's a huge cost when you're relocating someone to another country, especially if you're paying for shipping of their furniture or anything like that. So you want to make sure that the company doesn't incur a large financial cost, but you also don't want to incur a people loss because what if that person quits and they're like,
Exactly.
forget
That's
it.
one of the reasons why we were so adamant about building in place some of the things in our system, in terms of, you know, based on a lot of our experiences, myself and and the co-founders and others we know, like yourself, who has gone through the process. Most of these cultural immersion programs end at 6 months, but 6 months is actually when um, people start to feel like, oh, wait, what did I do? This is a bad idea. Let me let me rethink this, right? So
Yeah.
um, we encourage on the platform that candidates stay in touch with us and with the hiring managers for at least 18 months to just check in all the time, making sure everything is okay, that if there's anything that they need, um, something can be done about that so that it makes it more comfortable. And then also beforehand, we have um, all the comparisons that you're speaking about. We have in the planning tools. Hopefully, the candidates and the companies are not bypassing that tab um, on their dashboard. But the planning tools actually allow you to make a comprehensive list of differences between where you're going and where you're coming from. And we also have a special um, cost of living calculator that takes into consideration what your lifestyle is, both on the company and the candidate side, in terms of making that decision on, is this going to be enough for me to live the same kind of lifestyle or a similar lifestyle to what I'm living, or a better lifestyle than what I'm living, to where I'm going, or does it just look like a high salary and it's not going to give me the good lifestyle that I might have had where I was coming from.
Melissa, I want to piggyback on this, and as a champion of POCME, I think if you're in a company that isn't the size of a Marriott or British Airways, where you have your own division that does that, you need a tool, a resource that's going to help you do that, because we're having this conversation, sharing with you our experiences, and even myself, I've relocated within America. And that was a nightmare because I mean, I went from New York to California, and two totally different cultures. But needless to say, I wish there was a tool to kind of, help me through that. And like I said, if you're on a bigger company, you have different departments and stuff to help you. If you don't have that, then that's the great thing about POCME, is that you can go to that tool and help you put the package together that I was talking about. I mean, first and foremost, you do need that culture guide for where that person's going. And if you don't know how to figure out how to do the COLA, the taxes, and things like that, POCME is a great resource to help you put that together, and should be part of your conversation with the who you're relocating, who you're hiring to bring on board, and even when you're in your planning stage, so you know what your cost is going to be as a company.
Thank you. I really appreciate those words because that was super important to us as we were building out the tools. And just so everybody knows, COLA is the cost of living analysis. Um,
Oh, sorry about that habit.
it's okay. It's okay. I do it all the time. Um, so let's move on now in terms of, did you want to get a little bit more into how to analyze the cost of living? Let's say someone else is listening, they're not ready to join, to get on the platform, and they, you know,
I
want.
think it depends on where they're going, and I think by utilizing your COLA calculator, that would help them figure out if where they want to go is financially worth it. I won't lie to you, most people want to come to America. I mean, it's just what it is, only because you get more for your money here, and the portions are three times the size of most countries. And people who want to relocate to another country, it's only because most of the times I find it's curiosity, more than anything else. Like, oh, like when somebody's like, oh, I want to go to Cambodia, and I'm like, really? What?
I think also, yeah, I mean, I think, which is another reason why we did this platform too, right? Because a lot of the times is that there's no information available. There's all these platforms funneling everybody to either US and Europe, not showing all the other amazing experiences that are possible in other countries.
Yeah.
Um, so I think it's a little bit of both in terms of, lack of information, and then also um, you're only seeing the bright shiny object in front of you, right?
And then it's so interesting because I don't know if you guys remember, during COVID, they had all these different programs going on. So Italy had these programs where you can relocate your life to a place, to a city in Italy. It's not Rome, and it's not like Florence or Milan. It's like an hour outside of Rome, and they were paying for your housing, but you would have to relocate for a year. You would have to show proof that your job was remote and all these things. And people were relocating in droves, and I'm like, okay, you do realize you're going from here to there. You're going to eat Italian food every single day. Like, are you thinking this? No, it's free rent in Italy. And I'm like, okay, and you're locked in for a year, because you also have to pay taxes in Italy and taxes in America. That was part of the exchange.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, do you make enough money for all of this? And people were like, yeah, I'm going, I'm gonna be Italian. I was like, okay.
As you say that, a lot is changing actually in terms of the movement of people. So right now there is a mass exodus of people from Brazil to Portugal because Portugal just opened up their um, 6-month visa program where you can um, move to Portugal without a job, and you have 6 months to find a job. And yeah, and then if you speak Portuguese, you're in a higher tier of acceptance, right? So you have special benefits if you speak Portuguese. So all the Brazilians
All
are
Brazilians speak Portuguese, yeah.
right now. And then there are, so many programs that because of the labor shortage now, so many programs are opening up. Singapore has changed their work permit rules. Netherlands has changed their work permit rules. Um, Great Britain has now added a whole slew of universities that if you went to that university, you are automatically in for a work permit. I mean, so much is changing now, and that's why it's important to not only know about your pension and your healthcare benefits, all those things, but it's also important to know about the migration benefits for your country. Like I mentioned before with Brazil, the benefit is that they all speak Portuguese, so they can easily move to Portugal, right? So look out for things like that. Just do regular searches to say, hey, is there any treaty with my country and any other country, right? A Google search.
And it's interesting because I'm only talking about this from a corporate perspective. If you're in a company that has multi locations, you can move within the company. In the US, if we have a blanket L visa and we have business in, let's say, India, if you're employed from India, I can move you under the blanket L. There's other reverse visas for other countries. You know, recently there's been a lot of changes in the borderlines, like the EU. England's not part of the EU anymore. So they actually lost a lot of technical vocational workers who was coming in from Poland and stuff like that because they were all part of the EU. So now the thing about the labor shortage is very interesting because I look at this across all borders, and you'd be surprised because if somebody's remote, you can hire somebody from anywhere in the world and you're fine. But if you need someone to physically be at a job to do a physical job, it's much harder to bring them in from another country because of all the different changes in terms of what's allowed, what's not allowed, moving people and stuff. So it's interesting because you should also see what the labor shortages is per country, but per industry or per position, I should say.
Exactly. And also, so a lot of people are thinking that this labor shortage is as a result of the pandemic, but a lot of people don't know this has been in the making for quite a long time because of our aging population. So in almost all fields, there are people aging out of jobs and not enough to fill them. And it's just basically because they're not in the right location. So, and I wanted to also touch on, I know I'm going from one thing to the next really quickly, but you mentioned remote work being a little bit easier. In some instances, that is not the case because there are compliance issues with hiring people remotely in another country in some instances. So that's another thing that both companies and candidates need to think about is when you're thinking about a remote opportunity, think about the ramifications of that. Can that person be in another country, or can they just have to work remotely within the same city that the office is in? We partner with Deal, who does a very good job at helping to figure out, what those compliance issues would be. So plug here if you want to get some discounts on the Deal packages. We have some in our platform.
And something else to add to that, I remember this when we started the deal. So we would hire international reporters called stringers, and they were freelance talent. But because they were in other countries, we paid them through wires. So they're not on our payroll, and we don't have a footprint in that country. So they were responsible for all of their taxes, all of their filings, all of their pension. So when you're an employee, there's some reciprocity with the government because of the filings and stuff. But if you're on your own, you have to figure all that out, especially if you're getting international money. Each country has different laws around that in terms of what you're paying in taxes. So that's something else to think about with the remote. If you're a freelancer, is what the ramifications are if you're working for a company that's abroad.
And likewise for the company thinking about hiring the person abroad. So yeah, I mean, this has been a good conversation. I think I want to close out this conversation by bringing it back in. And what I mean by that is a person has now moved away. But it might be in their mind to eventually go back home. How do they stay on the radar of companies within their home countries?
Wow, that's a great question. And it's a great question to close out with. You know, it's that has been the mystery for a lot of people. Unless you have a secondant, which is a defined year of term, and the secondant knows that after 2 years they're coming back, then that's one piece of it. But then you have people who relocate, they fall in love with the country, they want to stay there, their kids are in school there, they don't want to pull them out and so forth. And it's like, wait a minute, you can't stay there, you have to come back. And it's like, well, what do you have to deal with that in that situation? So in terms of the ask, Melissa, it's interesting because it depends on the person. Like sometimes people go and they relocate and their career goals change. And whereas they were thinking, oh, I'm going to go live in this country because it's going to help me get this job, then all of a sudden they fall in love with the country. They're like, well, I don't want that job anymore. I just want to stay here. So then you have that issue to deal with. Or you have somebody that's like, wait a minute, hello, home country, I'm still here. Don't forget about me. How come Steve got the promotion and I didn't? I thought the deal was is that you brought me back and I got that promotion. So I think it's also important that duality in terms of reporting lines is important, especially if the goal is to bring the person back. So they should have someone they talk to, like a dotted line in their home country, along with whoever they're reporting to in the country they got relocated to. And I think if you have that duality and both people are responsible for performance evaluations, making compensation decisions, making decisions about their career, that would help that person in terms of not being lost by wherever they relocated from.
Okay, I think that's extremely important for the hiring managers to consider, because especially now in these days, because of the L1 visa being so much easier to attain than the H1 visa in the US, many companies will, move. They may move an employee from their home country to a totally different country, not the USA, have them work there for a year and then move them to the US. But as you said, that person might fall in love with that midway country. What do you do then, right?
Yes, yeah, it's very true. But I think the key thing also is you don't want headquarters to forget about the person or their home country to forget about the person. So I think, I know it sounds like I'm adding additional work onto the team, but you know what? at the end of the day, why are you relocating that person if it's not going to increase the company's profitability?
Exactly.
And what's increasing your company's profitability is the employee. So you kind of have to keep that level of employee engagement as high as possible, because you're moving that person with the intention that they're going to contribute towards productivity and revenue. So I think asking two people to have duality in the management of the person is not a large ask. I
At all.
understand everybody, nobody likes to do performance evaluation. I understand that. I know. Trust me. I, I even struggle with doing it, but it you would be surprised that one small paragraph goes a long way.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Natasha. The time has come upon us. This has been an amazing conversation and very insightful. I hope both hiring managers and candidates got a lot out of it and are now um, definitely putting their pen to paper in terms of what I need to think about in approaching this international opportunity. Uh, the big news that I mentioned before is that we heard some of the hiring managers asking for more time to go through all the amazing talent that we have on the platform from 40 plus countries. So we have extended the job fair to October 31st, and the company
Yay.
now spend a little bit more time um, going through the candidate profiles. And also, if you are listening to this and you have not yet signed up as a company or a candidate, feel free to sign up. You can reach out to us at info@pacme.com as a company, and we will send you the sign up code for the job fair. And then also, in terms of just signing up in general, you can go to pacme.com /GJFW. All right. Have a wonderful, wonderful Friday, everybody. And thank you for joining in. Thank you again, Natasha, for imparting your amazing wisdom on us.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for including me in this conversation. I really enjoyed it. And I hope everybody has a wonderful weekend. And don't forget, please go on the POCME site. It's been such a game changer for myself, my clients, and so forth. I cannot highly recommend it any more than that. So have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye.